What's up, baseball glove buddies? Dave Wagner, Wagner Baseball Glove Repair, and I'm here with, we're looking at, in video 2, we're looking at the big three brands, pluses and minuses inside of each brand. So this is going to be models to look for, models to probably pass on, based on what you're trying to do. So I wrote some notes on this. Hopefully this will be under 10 minutes, but there are a lot of pros and cons, and a lot of folks have lots of questions. I'm going to try and handle basic questions. This is not a basic video, though. You're going to need to know a little bit more about gloves to really engage. I have other videos on YouTube which should help, and you can watch some other guys. That's fine, but let's hit it. I'm in Chicago, or Skokie, which is a mile and a quarter from Chicago. And Chicago was a town that Wilson Sporting Goods was created in, and now it still has its headquarters in the suburbs. So in Chicago, it's a Wilson town, and that may sound funny, but if you were to head to Missouri, you would find more Rawlings being used because Rawlings is a Missouri company. Okay, so in this neighborhood, more Wilsons than anything else. That's what I work on the most. It doesn't mean that any glove is better or worse. It just happens to be the one I'm starting my list with. It's not the best or the worst. We're only talking about Wilson, Rawlings, and Mizuno now. So I'm going to go Wilson, Rawlings, Mizuno. Don't get bothered by the order. It's not like best to worst. It's just what I happen to write down. So with Wilsons, things that they are known for. One thing is Wilsons are the only glove that's kind of designed on purpose, and I've got videos on this, for slightly smaller adult hands. And that is because of how they construct their finger liners. And I know I don't have a diagram for this. There's another video about dual welting that I did, which really explains why this happens. Wilsons fit adult hands that are average to small very, very well. Mizuno's also fit this way. Asian design, smaller hand design. Just like on my, not these Oakleys, but another pair of Oakleys. There are Asian fit Oakleys for slightly higher cheekbones. Okay, so there's something to where a glove was designed. So you'll find that in gloves that are Japanese inspired or designed in Japan, slightly smaller finger liners. Smaller folks, smaller hands. Okay, kind of interesting. Most people don't realize it, but it's you know, it happens. So my hand, not very large. I know you can't tell by my picture here. Not that big. I fit Wilsons quite well. For me, Rawlings are a little bit bigger inside. Well, they actually are. So I tend to move around a lot. And I'm a big fan of control. The less my finger slides around, the more I can move the glove. The more I can move the glove, the more control I'll have. The more I'll be able to fine tune how my hand is moving to catch the ball where I want to. So that's a Wilson thing. They came up with dual welting. Believe it or not, a Japanese gentleman designed that in the 1980s, but they have been making high-end gloves for at least 100 years. So dual welting, it just helps smaller fingers fit. Now you have two major pro line model lines, the A2000 and the A2K. Well, what are the differences? Basic difference: all of the best hides, leather hides that Wilson can get their hand on, they will sort them all out, and the best hides they can find, they will put in a pile, and it'll be like their A quality, and that is their pro stock leather. So on an A2000, on the thumb, you'll say pro stock. It does not mean the glove was given to a major league player. It's marketing, folks, okay? Then they will go into that pile of A pro stock hides, and they will take the top 10% of the pro stock hides and mark them pro stock select. They are tanned the same way. There's nothing different about them. They're just the finest examples that the Wilson leather checkers can find. Those are the hides that go into the building of an A2K. So that's why one says pro stock, the other one says pro stock select. Same tanning. Wilson does not produce a kip leather glove. I'm mentioning that now because other companies do offer that, and they're higher end. Wilson doesn't do it. So that might help if you're trying to figure out what is kip and whatever. Wilson, no kip. What you're getting in an A2K, in my opinion, is an overbuilt, overheavy glove. Heavier the glove is, the harder it is to get to where the ball is. Okay, so an A2K will actually have an extra layer of leather in it, now up to 4 layers, Generally, I will remove one of them because it's too much. That's dead weight, doesn't necessarily help. On the A2K line, from way back, there are 2 layers of leather against your palm. Now the A2000, starting in 2021, also features those 2 layers. Okay, there's nothing good or bad about this. I tend to prefer 1 layer on the palm, which means I'll actually mention this later on. If you can find 2020 or before A2000s, you're probably going to get a little bit better performance out of them. Okay, A2000, A2K, slightly different leather, slightly different features. Just think A2K, higher price, lower performance, generally pass. And I'm serious. There are very few A2K models that aren't available as A2000s. So, if they're the same thing, buy the A2000. It's cheaper. The leather is a little more rough and ready. It tends to stay stiffer longer. Save money, right? Specific models that Wilson does really, really well. Okay, and Wilson has an easier model system to talk about because they have consistent model numbers. So if you are looking for a middle infielder's glove, Wilson is most likely going to be your best choice of the big 3. The models 1786, 1787, 1788 are all iWebs. They are routinely found on major league infielders. They are very popular with college players, etc. This is the pattern or set of patterns that Wilson seems to have knocked out of the park. They've been producing them for 20 to 40 years, depending on different iterations. They really seem to have a good idea of how to make a middle infielder's glove. So, if you're looking for a middle infielder's glove, and you don't have a huge hand, there's a really good chance that looking for a Wilson A2000 1786, 87, or 88 is where to start. For some reason, 86s are 11.5 inches, 87s are 11.75 inches, and 88s are, of course, 11.25, which I don't know, but whatever. That's a great middle infielder's glove. As you head into other positions, nothing is really a huge showpiece glove for Wilson, I feel, in the outfield. The 1799 is your standard H-Web for the outfield. Pretty good. The KP92 is a modified trap, and truthfully, that's probably, in my opinion, this is my opinion, based on building these and using them, probably the least high performance of their outfield ideas. We'll talk about it a little bit in Rawlings. Rawlings, that 11.75 inch modified trap, it doesn't seem to play that well for most guys. You won't see it much in the major leagues, which should tell you a little bit. Something you might want to avoid with Wilson, it only comes, I believe, on the A2000s, spin control. Starting in 2021, they started putting out patterns with dimples on them. If you know your gloves, the SSK Dimple 2, Dimple 1s, mid to late 80s. But these have dimples everywhere. It's supposed to control the spin of the ball. I'm going to tell you right now, that is hogwash. It doesn't do anything. Do not waste the money and think that you have to get that one to get a better glove. You don't. Okay. When it comes to catcher's mitts, Wilson used to have some pretty good catcher's mitts, but about 3 or 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, they came out with what's called a DPCM, Dustin Pedroia catcher's mitt, DPCM, a 33-inch catcher's mitt that I think is the best catcher's mitt for the average hand that is being made today from any of the brands in the world. Very reliable. If you have to get a catcher's mitt, this is the Wilson I would consider. Okay, I would consider the Wilson DPCM. That would be for a normal to slightly below normal size hand, 33 inches, very easy to modify, very reliable, not a lot of problems with the design. That's a great one from them for a catcher's mitt. When it comes to first base mitts, the one from Wilson that you probably look at is the A2800. There are a few different designs, but the A2800 is more or less unchanged for about 50 to 65 years. Pretty reliable, 2 hinge points, right, and a vertical post. Pretty reliable first baseman's mitt. That's probably their best first baseman's mitt model. But you can look around, okay? This is my opinion. I mentioned this before. If you can get your hands on an A2000 built before 2020, it won't have the 2 palm layers of leather, and the other thing it won't have, and I'm not showing you is they put this funny extra pad on the back side of the wrist, which was supposed to make it more comfortable. It doesn't make it more comfortable. It simply just presses down on the back of your hand, making it a lot harder to get a perfect fit with the wrist strap assembly. So for those two reasons, if you can find a 2020 or older A2000, they still float around new or used, you're probably going to get a little bit more performance out of that particular model. I prefer to use those when I can find them. Okay. Now, Rawlings. We're going to Rawlings now. Rawlings, this is the glove for the sausage finger guy. Okay. You have fingers that are an inch longer than mine and a little thicker. You don't want a Wilson. Your hand's going to never fit. It's going to be like, you're going to be jamming it in there. Same with Mizuno. You're going to go with Rawlings. So one of the biggest ways you can tell whether or not a person's hands are large or small is by checking the glove brand they use. Rawlings is the glove for the larger hand person. They just are designed that way. The finger liners in the dual welting video I talk about, finger liners are designed with more room. Okay, so larger fingers, Rawlings is the way to go. They have two high-end product lines. Occasionally they'll throw in something else, but their Heart of the Hide line, their Pro Preferred line. Now here, as opposed to Wilson, where Wilson uses the same type of leather for either their A2000 or A2K line, Rawlings uses steer hide for their Heart of the Hide line, and then kip leather for their Pro Preferred line. Kip leather is basically harvested from younger steers, or whatever they're called, because there's a lot of different names for those things. Slightly lighter, slightly thinner, slightly more flexible. That's about the only thing you can say for sure on kip leather. It could be tanned in the US, it could be tanned in Northern Europe, it could be tanned in Japan. All three are very good with kip leather, okay? Kip leather performs pretty well. I don't have any, there's no real pluses or minuses to it. I find that the steer hide and the Heart of the Hide version, which again costs less money, is a little more rough and ready and tends to hold its shape a little bit longer. So again, in Heart of the Hide versus Pro Preferred, in the Pro Preferred you're getting 2 palm layers of leather. Heart of the Hide you're getting 1. I still find the Heart of the Hides generally are going to last a little bit longer and hold their shape a little bit better than the Pro Preferreds. Now, here's one caveat. Rawlings, of all these big three brands, uses the cheapest internal materials for their Pro line gloves. So the Heart of the Hides don't have nearly as nice felt as the Mizunos or the Wilsons. So the problem with the Heart of the Hide version is you will get internal materials that won't hold up quite as long. So they'll give you a little bit better shell leather as far as long-term durability, but the internal materials kind of collapse faster. The Pro Preferred gives you top flight internals, but you have that extra layer of palm leather. So the Pro Preferred versus Heart of the Hide is a little closer. I would say A2000's consistently better than an A2K. With Heart of the Hide, you got something to think about. Last thing with Heart of the Hides, there's what is called the R2G Heart of the Hide line, okay? Please know this. The internal materials of a Heart of the Hide R2G are the identical stuff as you'd find in the R9 series, which retails for $120. So they'll give you the Heart of the Hide shell leather in an R2G, but they won't give you the internals. So those gloves tend to break down more quickly because the internals aren't very good. Unfortunately for the buyer, although the R2Gs are taper fits, which is good for smaller hands, they tend to lose shape faster, and they only cost $30 less than a regular Heart of the Hide. So you really kind of have to pay a lot for some lousy internal materials. I don't like it much, but it is a taper fit. That means slightly smaller for slightly smaller hands. So a taper fit Rawlings is going to fit similar to a Pedroia fit Wilson. Similar. Pedroia fits have slightly smaller wrist openings, right? Slightly smaller finger liners. I didn't talk about it, but so taper fit Rawlings and a Pedroia fit Wilson are going to fit almost the same. So Rawlings does have some nice taper fit options. In their lower level, in their lower quality level brand or model line, the R9 series has become my favorite to recommend for the young travel ball player, somewhere between 8 and 12. For only 120, you get a smaller version of a Major League pattern, which is really good. So you get all the insight of all those years of designing perfect pattern, shrunk about, to about 80% of the original size. Those are really, really great sellers. In fact, they have more or less put a big hurt on some of these custom only or smaller brands that have popped up, which are featuring youth specialty. The R9 series is taking the business away from those smaller companies, and I'm fine with that. I don't care who's better. I just want to know who's the best stuff to recommend. So I like the R9 series for smaller hands, youth travel ball guys. It doesn't really come in customs, but who cares? Why would you want a custom glove for an 8-year-old? I don't know. Great models from Rawlings. These are some specific names. Catcher's mitts, the Pro CM 33. They're the CM 33 pattern. Fantastic design. The CM 43, very good design, only an inch larger. Those two catcher's mitts will solve most catcher's problems. Those are my two that I recommend most highly from Rawlings. Their first base mitts, a lot of them are good. So match the size of your what you want, 12 inch, 12 and a half, 12 and a quarter, and most of their first base mitt models in the heart of the hide range will perform quite well. There isn't really a big clunker out of that mix. As far as individual infielder, outfielder ideas, the H-webs that show up in the Bryce Harper style outfielder's gloves are very similar to the Wilson 1799. Very reliable. Lots of pros use those. Wilson makes now a trapeze style outfielder's glove called the OT6. That's more or less in competition with the Rawlings trapeze, which is another 70-year-old design used by outfielders in the major leagues. Not as many outfielders use trapeze gloves as H-webs or vertical posts, but they do show up sometimes, and it would be an oversight not to mention them. The trapeze is an easy to break in glove that will form to your hand very quickly. It doesn't have a rigid top across the web, so some players don't like that. Some players are okay with it, but it's a good one to look at when you're looking for an outfielder's glove from Rawlings. At least put one on, because you might be surprised at how they feel. H-webs all around from Rawlings, I think, are very, very solid. So in their infielders versions, you got Brandon Crawford on the Giants. He uses an H-web there. A few other guys do. The H-web from Rawlings, I think, is a stronger performer on the infield than anything Wilson makes. However, I tend to think that the I-web from Rawlings on their high-end gloves is a little less effective than Wilson's, and it basically comes down to the fact that the Rawlings designs are slightly taller than the Wilsons. Wilsons don't have as big a gap between the top and the bottom rails, and I think that's why they're less common in the major leagues. What happens with the Rawlings is you have more of a tendency for the ball to start sinking in on the either side of the I-web than you would with a Wilson. I don't really like playing Rawlings I-webs, even if the taper fit is perfect. I prefer, like I mentioned, those Wilson middle infielders gloves. Personal preference, but a lot of experience in talking to people and trying to get their stuff ready to go. So take a look at them, but give Wilson a real serious look for an infielder's I-web. It's a good thing to consider. Now, Wilson has what's called super skin. It's a synthetic leather they've been using for about 25 years to save weight on the backs of gloves. Rawlings has two other types of synthetic leather called hypershell or speed shell. All of these are basically derivatives of stuff used in goalie pads from the early 90s. It's not necessarily going to make the companies aren't trying to cheat you and give you something cheaper than leather, because synthetic leathers cost more to make. They're trying to help you save weight, but there's kind of a plus minus here. You will have lighter weight, there's no question, but there isn't as much internal rigidity in a synthetic leather as there is in a real leather. So what you'll see in the hyper shell, the speed shell from Rawlings, or the super skin from Wilson, you will see a slight decrease in stability of the entire shell. So you'll tend to have a glove get floppier quicker in one of these synthetic setups. But do I prefer hyper shell over speed shell? It's kind of like you pick what you'd like. Is it bad? No, not bad. They're both good resisting abrasion, just like super skin's fine. But you will lose some of the ability for the glove to retain its shape. I actually wrote in this notes up here in the Wilson section. The M1s have super skin on the back. Don't buy M1s. Don't buy M2s. In general, don't buy them because they tend to break down very quickly because of the super skin on the back. Rawlings, years ago, and I didn't write it down, came out with mesh backs. 100% pass. Mesh backs are the least stable on the backside, so a lot of you guys will look at your Yadier Molinas and he's got mesh on the back of his. I'm telling you right now, the Yadier Molina will not hold up as long, hold the shape as long as a plain old CM33. It just won't, because the mesh back is kind of like backpack material as opposed to leather. So that's kind of a rundown of some of the synthetics that are being used. As far as I'm aware, Mizuno does not offer any synthetics, which makes some sense because Mizuno is arguably the one that's most focused on highest quality. We're going to get them in a minute. Leather. Options if you want a custom. Rawlings offers a couple of interesting custom options for padding systems. Wilson doesn't offer aftermarket padding systems in a custom. It doesn't offer it. Rawlings has two. One is pretty good. This is called a leather reinforced palm pad, where a piece of probably 2 or 3 ounce steer hide is sewn on the inside and glued or contact cemented, and it goes inside your palm kind of like this. That's a pretty good system. It doesn't break down, it doesn't move, it doesn't shift, right? Pretty good. They also have Poron, P-O-R-O-N, which is a thin foam chartreuse color, almost the same as that. The issue with Poron, and I'm going to look in the trash, see if I have any. Oh, I do, okay. The issue of Poron is this. Pardon me for the delay. The issue with Poron is it's thin and flimsy and has a tendency to rub itself out. It kind of rubs, it gets rubbed out, and then the particles collect and move around. Not a great padding system. Poron can work effectively in ice hockey gear, which I have in some of mine, but when you try and make it flex, it loses some of its characteristics. The big characteristics that you want with Poron is if something strikes you hard, the foam stays somewhat rigid, but when you press it softly, it moves better. Works great in a chest protector when you're preventing someone from getting hit in the heart. Works really well. But when you're trying to fold a glove around it, they do not do well. So if you're going to custom one of those things and they say, hey, do you want a leather reinforced palm pad or Poron? You can choose the leather reinforced palm pad if you want. Don't ever choose the Poron. Never Poron. I routinely take it out of every single new glove, and I have never had somebody complain about it. It doesn't last long, it crumbles, and it moves around and shifts and makes lumps. Skip Poron if you can avoid it. So that's Rawlings. I don't know if we're over 10 minutes, but I said this is going to be a little more intense. Going to Mizuno, I think their current high-end models are, this year, the Pro Select SE, and that's a guess. Look on Just Ball Gloves for their $280 variant and their $380 variant. Whatever the names of those things are, that's what they happen to be for this year. It's very hard to tell because Mizuno likes to play with the names. So one year, a Classic is a great glove, and 2 years later, it's a Classic Limited, and it's okay. But then they bring out a Limited Pro, and that's better, and then the Pro Select SE, and they use the words Pro, Limited, and Classic, and mix them all up every 3 years. It's hard to necessarily track it. So look at the price points, $280, $380. Same thing I've said with all the other brands. The $280 version and the $380 version, generally pick the cheaper one. You're not going to get much more for your money. Now Mizuno, like Rawlings, on its highest end gloves, goes from steer hide to kip. Okay, similar to Rawlings. It'll be Deguchi tan generally, which is Japanese tan, very good. But as far as long-term durability, the kip has a tendency to get a little more flexible and a little more soft quickly. Okay, internal build quality is going to be the finest in a Mizuno. All right, in their high-end gloves, they still have never put 2 layers of leather together on the palm, and I kind of like that because I think that's not going to help, or I don't think it's a big help when you have that 2 layers in there, like Wilson puts in all their high-end gloves now. Rawlings only puts in their Pro Preferred. Mizuno doesn't offer it, and I hope they keep not offering it. So they'll just give you a thicker piece of palm leather instead of 2 smaller ones sandwiched together. Works fine. As I said, Mizuno's are more of like, of these three brands are kind of like the work of art type gloves. Best fit and finish, best internal materials. You don't get cheap felt in a $280 glove from Mizuno. You don't. And they're going to have the least number of blemishes or seam errors of all of these brands. They're going to fit small hands, but they won't have a dual welting system like Wilson does, but they're typically for smaller hands. This is a strange thing to mention about Mizuno, but it's very true. Mizuno patterns, or the basic designs they put out, are interesting in that they are designed so carefully that they're almost designed for a certain type of way to close the glove, and that's it. So Mizuno's are designed for every finger to be in the correct slot for closure. So when you try and go two in the pinky in a Mizuno, you may find that you're fighting against the pattern a bit more than you ever would with a Wilson or a Rawlings. It sounds strange, but if you go to the store and you try on a Wilson high-end and a Mizuno and they look almost the same sizes, and you try and go two in the pinky, the Wilson will feel a little bit better than the Mizuno, and a Rawlings will probably feel the best. Okay, that's just how it's done. I'm not sure why they do that, but Mizuno tends to design gloves that are, I call them persnickety. They just are very particular with how they want them to close. So when I work on them and rebuild them, I can make them much more usable, but off the shelf, they're going to be the one that kind of doesn't feel as user-friendly, if that makes sense. But the internal fit, the internal quality, and the fit and finish will be the finest in the big three consistently. Probably the glove that I would recommend from them, they have two that are pretty well known, and this is the difference. Mizuno doesn't have any patterns that everybody loves, and that's kind of why they're the third in the big three. The glove that is probably their most recognizable is an outfielder's design called the Ichiro Trapeze. It's a very good design, but again, you're going to be playing that glove with four fingers in their normal slots, finger out. That's kind of how it's built to play. And if you want to play two in the pinky, it's going to feel funny. It is an innovative design. I played the outfield for 3 seasons with an Ichiro trap, and it felt very good. But I've noticed from one model year to the next, the Ichiro traps don't feel the same. I was using a Global Elite like 2017, and when I tried a Global Elite from 2020, I didn't even know what it was. So, tough to tell. You can get them pro issues sometimes. You'll see people selling Ichiros. That's the Mizuno that folks will sell in the groups. The most common one they'll sell from Mizuno is the Ichiros, and they'll try, it's the samurai blue or whatever, the special mariner blue. But as far as use goes, it's probably their most unique outfielder's glove and their best known. Might not feel great for everybody. It's not one that you see used by lots of guys in the major leagues, which should tell you that it's like it was designed for Ichiro, and he's the only guy that really liked it. Let's see. They have a glove that was first designed for Tom Glavine mid-late 1990s. Also used by Matt Cain on the Giants way back when. It's a pitching glove, combination of a basket down the middle and a modified trapeze along the edges. Some guys like that. I've owned it. It feels a little bit more like an outfielder's glove than a pitching glove to me, but I'd mention it. Catcher's mitts, I don't normally recommend Mizuno catcher's mitts unless you have extremely strong hands. They're high-end classic limited or whatever it is. The $300 version is arguably the stiffest. Even when I take it all apart and put it all back together, remove the palm adhesive and everything, the hardest to work with catcher's mitt. If you look in the major leagues, Mizuno's are not that common on catcher's hands. Okay, so that's kind of a rundown of the big three. In certain models they do well, certain things they do well, certain things you might want to pass on. So maybe pass on spin control from Wilson, pass on R2G Heart of the Hides from Rawlings, and pass on mitts from Mizuno. So look at fielders go, but not mitts. So hopefully that's helpful. The third video is going to talk about random models from random brands that are really unique and or fast pitch. So stay tuned for that.